Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so we have the lovely Keira Bell, and this is for DeTrans Awareness Day. And I think the most important thing me and you could talk about, Keira, would be what would the average, person who's going to detransition need? Where are they going to? Where are they going to go? And I suppose if we were to start, I think there's two places. I'm not putting words in your mouth, and you put me right. The two things that come to me would be, one would be, there must be a couple of years where you're lost in transition. It must be, because I've met them, they've emailed me, where they haven't quite got to the place of detransition, but they're in a very, very dark place. And I'm thinking, should there be something for those people? And should that not be the word detransition, because that would freak them out? Should there be a space where people go? And some of them might continue with their transition, but some of them might have the brain space. So would it be a clinic? Would it be a drop-in centre? What do you think about that, first of all, that idea of the people who are transitioned and kind of thinking, where am I? I'm not sure where I fit. What do you think about that?
I definitely felt that they would need, of course, they would need some sort of support. I don't know for sure in what capacity, but I think personally, I lean towards the idea that they should have just kind of generalized therapy anyway. But I suppose that gets onto the larger topic of the mental health crisis. And, that's a really big issue to kind of get stuck into. But the term detransition, I think, is really daunting for anyone. Especially, if you've been transitioned for many years and the stigma attached to it, no one really wants to associate with that, at least not in the beginning. I think it's definitely best to stay away from that term, probably, for people in that middle ground.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So there has to be a place where transitioners can go, but people who are transitioned, where they can go and question without feeling they're going to be hammered into detransition or going to be hammered into staying, that they can just question.
Yes. Yeah.
And that would need to be therapists. I think you're right, therapists need to do it. But I think it would be nice if the NHS, I know Hilary Cass is doing a review and looking at needs, if there was a concept where there was a place where people who are questioning their gender, and it's the larger sense. You can question your gender when you've transitioned, you can question your gender pre-transition. Have you ever heard of the kind of therapeutic support group that Az Hakim did, kind of in the kind of early noughties?
No, I don't know too much about that. I know of him.
I tell you what he did. It's kind of interesting, and nobody's really reproduced it. He had a therapeutic group. It was a group of people, and half of them were people who wanted to transition, and half of them were people who had already transitioned. And they met, and the people who were already transitioned weren't happy with their transition. Weren't necessarily going to detransition, but weren't happy. And so they met, and what he found was, it's extraordinary. It was something like 2 or 3%. It was a very small percentage of people went on to transition, having had therapeutic group work with people who had transitioned and weren't happy. Because the people who saw the people who had transitioned, they were going, this is so much harder than I thought. But I think that's an amazing concept, and Az stopped it. He used to do it through the NHS in the first 10 years or so. It was kind of 2002 to 2012 he did it. Sounds amazing. And it was through the NHS. I think a lot of people could benefit from something like that. I wonder, had you met a transitioned person pre-transition? Did you meet many, and would have made it if they weren't happy? I wonder what you would have thought.
Yeah, I don't think I met anyone before I transitioned, and barely after I transitioned. I do think it probably would have put things into perspective for sure. The attitude to everything has definitely changed since I transitioned anyway. It was as simple as, are you going to transition? Do you see yourself as the opposite sex? And now it's branched out into, you're questioning your gender or your gender identity, and you can be all of these different things. And it's even beyond me at this point. So it's definitely, you know, it's gonna take a lot of work, and you know, with all of this stuff kind of, you know, murky in the waters and stuff. I mean, it's gonna be quite a task. But yeah, I think yeah, there's definitely a few different ways to do it. I mean, what was the guy's name again?
As Hakeem. As Hakeem. Yeah.
Yeah. So he did that through the NHS. Was that through like a gender clinic or?
Yeah, he did that in the Tavistock. Or you know, he definitely did it. I'll put up some information. You know, part of this talk, I'll put up some information about it. But he did it. He catalogued. He wrote about it, and nobody was very interested when he left. He left to go on to do some other work, and he said, "There is this thing I'm doing," and nobody was very interested, and so it stopped. And I just think it's a brilliant idea. I think the brilliant idea would really help people. It's like, here's people on this side, here's people on that side. Let's just talk about the experiences, because I think no matter what, an awful lot of people, even if they're glad they transitioned, there's a lot they regret. There's a lot of things they didn't expect. There's a lot of things. And I often wonder, kind of psychologically, you might be interested in this. Some people just don't regret things. It's nothing to do with whether they really regret it or not. It's the way they live their life. As in, I don't do regrets. Well, some people say, no, I do regrets. I regret that. I wish I hadn't done that, but now I'm happy and I could do this. Well, some people go, no, I don't do regrets. It's almost a philosophy in life. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm still, you know, I kind of, I'm not really sure where I stand on that just yet. I think I'm still kind of figuring things out from a very basic kind of standpoint. You know, I think the term regret, that's just kind of followed me on. Like, people just kind of assume that
putting it onto you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that. I think I'm more prone to try and see it as not a regret. I try not to see it as regret, because I think even that term being put on it can kind of dictate the way I feel about certain things. So I try to stay away from the term regret. I don't particularly like that term myself.
I think that's very interesting, because I did a film, Trans Kids, in 2018. Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. And in it, I made friends with a lovely woman. She's called Keira. She was a detransitioned woman. And we gave her an interview, and she's in the film. I think she's one of the first detransition people who were on the mainstream, if not the first. And she said she was ripping. She was really angry with what had happened to her. She didn't regret it, because it was part. How can you take a chunk of your life and regret it? It's a big concept. She didn't regret it, but she was angry that it was allowed to happen. If you follow me, you can be both.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I'm quite a spiritual person. You know, I do believe things happen for a reason as well. And so, I mean, if that didn't happen to me, I don't know what would have happened, but I would have been a different person. And so I can't focus on like what I would have been in a different timeline or whatever.
Do you know what it's like? It's like when somebody says, oh, if somebody had shot Hitler in 1938, well, then we wouldn't have had the war, and then we wouldn't have had. It's like,
yeah.
So imagine, let's go on to imagine the person has gone through that weird brain space of a few years of thinking, can I get out of this? And they got to the point of, I should detransition. Were you introduced to the concept of detransition before you detransitioned? Because I think this is a key point, if you follow me.
I don't think I was, not in a substantial kind of capacity anyway. I mean, I think I'd potentially heard the term, but I think even I distanced myself. If I had heard of it, I would have distanced myself from it, because it had negative connotations, and also I was so sure in myself, or I thought I was so sure in myself that it never even crossed my mind. It was never a thing where I learned of the term and I was like, "Ooh, that rings true in some way." It was simply like I was just on it. I was just like one track minded about it, so it wasn't even like in my thought space or whatever. Like, it really wasn't. So yeah, I think maybe if it was if I was taught about detransition and that is possible, which I think would have been even harder back then, because I don't think it was really talked about back then. It's only been in the last few years, I'd say, that the term has really come about in a substantial way, and the possibility seems more, it seems more possible for people. Yeah.
Well, it probably does for you, because you're living your life, I'd say, because I know some parents and they are saying the concept of detransition to their kids, and the kids are like, no. Like you, there would be a shutter of, no, I'm not going there. And do you remember what led you to suddenly saying, well, I'm going to stop? Did you kind of just stop testosterone, or did you make a decision to detransition? Or there's quite a few people have said to me, I didn't make a decision, I just stopped testosterone.
No, I think I did make the decision, or even if it was I'm stopping the testosterone, it was very, like, a very short amount of time before I then decided, like, no, like all of this is, you know, just looking at the big picture. But yeah, I just knew that I didn't want to continue with the hormones anymore, and that's the thing. It's like detransition. I think people have the idea that detransition means reverse, when it doesn't. I think D is like the Latin root meaning stop, right? So detransition just means stop. It doesn't mean reverse transition. So I think the term. Well, yeah, the term is true. It does make sense, but people associate with detransition the term or the word with reverse, when it actually just means stop. So
wow. And what do you think you could have done with them? Like, what? Imagine we were to provide it to the average, 22-year-old who's just just stops their testosterone, or wherever they're around that. What could we provide them? Is it a clinic, and should it be a drop-in? Should there be regular group meetings? Is that a bit intense?
I feel like group stuff is all, like, regardless of why you're going to therapy, I think group stuff people always tend to shy away from, or they just don't like the sound of. And even when they go, they tend not to like the experience. So I I wouldn't really suggest group therapy. I'd say, I think definitely some sort of clinic for sure. It's just which way that's framed, or how it's set up, that's kind of the most important part. But yeah, perhaps like a clinic, or even just one-to-one therapy with someone that they can trust, and someone that they get along with. So
there's one part of me thinks, I'm interested to know what you think of this. One part of me thinks, if there was, now you might like this at all, but if there was a scenario where you're at a clinic, and for people who want to transition, they go that way. For people who are questioning, they go that way. For people who are detransitioning, as in stopping their transition, they go that way. And you could say, oh, I'd hate that. But I think it would actually be very powerful for the transitioners to know there are other aspects. Do you know what I mean? But it could be very harmful for the detransitioners to hear. I don't want to go anywhere near that kind of. Maybe I'm wrong.
So like a clinic that branches off depending on what?
Yeah.
I don't know, because I think even the people that, because I know that within the Tavistock, for example, I think, there was always this, there's almost like a competition that people kind of started amongst themselves of just like, oh, did you get in? Like, did you get referred, sort of thing? And if you didn't, it's like, the worst thing. So it's kind of, I don't know how to put it, but it's, it became, this weird competition, regardless of how good of a decision it was for you. Because, when you're talking with like vulnerable, young people, what's best for you can get kind of confused in group kind of, just seeing what other people are at and what stages they're at.
You're actually hitting upon something that's very well known in psychology. So you're dead right. For example, anorexia, right? You have to be really careful bringing anorexic people together, because they become become incredibly competitive. And so you're really treading on very thin ice, almost allowing them access to each other because they're competitive in a destructive way. And you just kind of hit upon it with gender dysphoria, that that's what happens. And so you're saying you could light all sorts of fires in people accidentally just by almost meeting each other or seeing each other. You could light up a fire of competition in them that shouldn't be lit. I think that's what you're saying, is it?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And yeah, I've not really like investigated that too much, but it's just something I've observed. And yeah, with branching it off like that, I think it definitely sets that up. Yeah, I feel like coming away from the models that have been used, for example, at the Tavistock as much as possible. I think that's probably the best thing to do, like coming away from that as much as possible. And breaking down those structures and making it just a more, I feel it just needs to be more of a general, and I could be wrong because other people are at different stages of their transition or detransition or whatever they're doing. But like I feel at this stage it needs to be more of a general like what's going on with you. You know, they just need to have a therapist in general. Therapy, yeah, like let's come away from, you know, oh, you're this or you're that, or you see yourself this way, or you see yourself that way. Like,
it's old-fashioned therapy that we've been doing for 100 years, which is what's going on for you, what's hard, what's going well. Let's explore what are the patterns. Just the basic therapy. You're so right. I think now you're talking, I'm kind of coming around to the idea of if there was maybe a phone line that people could ring, just like there's a phone line for people who are questioning that whether they're gay or not. There's a phone line for people who are, you know, there's lots of different phone lines for different aspects of life. What about a gender questioning phone line where you kind of go, and you could be anybody, if you follow me. You could be somebody who's thinking about detransition, you could be somebody who's seeking transition, and they have somebody at the end of the line who just is willing to carry out the therapeutic, not therapy because it's only a phone line, but certainly a therapeutic approach.
Yeah, I think that sounds good for sure. You know, I think it's also good for, you know, because that could be like one option, but I feel like it's also important for these people to see people face to face, because another thing is that a lot of people, they're caught up in like fantasy worlds and like, you know, I'm talking more specifically about those that have only just recently transitioned or are thinking of doing so, and maybe even people that are, you know, recovering from gender dysphoria. You know, it can still be kind of stuck in this like world that you've created for yourself, and so seeing someone physically and having therapy that way, I think that can kind of break that down, and you know, you're just kind of stripped bare in a way, as opposed to on the phone. I just think it's probably better for that. But yeah, the phone line.
I agree with you. Yeah. So we're creating. I hope the NHS are listening. We're creating a whole thing here. We're creating a phone line for one person, for everybody, but also a kind of a scenario where people actually physically meet. And you're right, something special happens. I know, like myself, when I work with clients, when I meet them one-on-one, it's so much more warmer and deeper and more real and more, just got more with it. So there's an actual physical place, a clinic you can go, and it's separated from everywhere. It's literally its own clinic, and it's some sort of detransitional center where people can actually go and get therapy. And it's not necessarily group. Although some people like it, you're kind of saying we'll need the one-to-one. So I can kind of see what's needed, and it occurs to me maybe there should be another place where it's questioning your gender, and it's not near the detransition clinic, because that could bring a lot of fear into something. It's over somewhere else, different part of the world, like maybe a different part of the city, and it's for people who are questioning their gender, whether they're medical transition or not. They're just questioning, and they have their place, and they're not meeting, so they're not freaking each other out or something, or making competition out of it. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you know, and I can only speak from experience and what I thought I would find beneficial, because I'm sure that, you know, if you speak to the next person, they might find group therapy amazing. That would be the thing that would help them. So I really,
we're exploring this today in DeTrans Awareness Day. That's the concept. Like, what does everybody move? Go on, I jumped in on you.
No, I forgot what I was going to say now, but no, it wasn't important, but just
well, I tell you, we're going to say, I don't know what other people want, but what I would like is one-on-one. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah. So, and also the language is definitely, you know, because that probably is another topic to discuss, really. But it's just it's a big topic, because you know, when you put out there, oh, you know, are you questioning your gender, and then it's up for debate whether gender's even, you know, what does gender mean? Like, I know, in my opinion, gender, I mean, it's just kind of gender roles that are made up by society. For other people, you know, I suppose particularly young people, they'll see it as like a literal thing that's like up here, and it's like hardwired, or it should dictate how your body is. And, you know, it's got to be so confusing for the kids now, is basically my point. Like, I don't know.
I think so, but the language is very important. This whole movement has been centered on language. And, you know, Ian Hacking wrote about this, and about how there's a concept called semantic contagion, which means a word can basically, now I'm probably going to make a mess of this, but I'll try my best. A word or a phrase can almost create more contagion. So the phrase trans kids could create more trans kids. Now, on the other hand, the phrase ROGD could work in a different way, or the phrase detransition coming into the world and becoming more common. That could have its own powerful effect, if you follow me. But a phrase in itself causes a contagion. It gives meaning to a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I think you're saying, basically, by throwing around the word gender, you'd want to look at that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, just kind of, because I suppose that would be particularly for the people that are questioning whatever, if they want to consider it their gender identity. You know, they're already confused about certain things, and I imagine going through other mental health issues as well. So I'm just worried about them and things becoming confused, because like you were saying, like you rightfully said, it's like, if power is given to the word gender, are you questioning your gender? Like, your gender, they're gonna think, oh yeah, like that's a thing, and, you know, then I don't know. I just
no, it's tricky. You're right.
I'm worried about a lot of things, really, and I just it's gonna be, like I said, it's gonna be a really difficult one. But I think just getting back to what we were saying about like more general help and like a general therapy service, I think on the phone would be good for maybe the people that are too anxious to come and meet in person, and then also having that option to meet someone in a impartial environment.
It would occur to me it would take about a few phone calls, and then they'd say, I want to meet somebody. You know, it would take a few good phone calls for you to think, I think I could. Right, we should finish it up. Is there any words of advice or anything you want to say to anybody who might be feeling lost in their identity? Anything you'd say to them?
Probably all the cliche stuff, like get out and try working out, and take a look at the trees and the sky above. Like, you know, I just no, seriously, I just think it's really a thing where you're just stuck in your head, and I've been there. I feel like I'm slowly coming out of that, where I'm not as much in my head. Like, I'm not just kind of, I'm thinking less and less about the concept of gender or even my sex. Like, it's not even a thing that I'm really thinking about as much in those terms. So just try and focus on external things, like as far as hobbies and things like that, and it will, you know, that's the right direction to go, I think. So okay,
thank you.
All right. Cheers.